Developments in the Middle East since October the 7th are a reflection of a major change in world affairs, that Israel in this much danger, this critical a position, it's kind of the epicenter of the reflection of how this change is occurring. And it starts outside the Middle East. My view is the post-Cold War era is over. It ended last year with the creation of a new axis between Beijing and Moscow. That axis has a long way to go to develop, but it's pretty clear. It has its outriders, North Korea, Iran, Syria, Belarus, and others. And the relations among the participants in this axis are going to have effects all over the world that will be more connected than appear. The West as a whole, frankly, has not adopted, it doesn't understand that we're in a time of enormous change. I don't think that we acted effectively in February of 2021-22, when the Russians invaded Ukraine for the second time. This has given great hope to the adversaries of the West, and I think the situation in the Middle East is a second time of testing that we're not reacting to very well. So I'm not going to rehearse events that all of you know, but I am going to give a different strategic twist to what's actually happening in the Middle East. It's misrepresented in the media and misunderstood by too many of our political leaders. What's happening right now is not an Arab-Israeli war. It's not a Palestinian-Israeli war. This is a war by Iran against Israel, using terrorist proxies to achieve its objectives. It is part of what the Iranians themselves call their ring of fire strategy around Israel, around the Gulf Arab states, and ultimately around the United States. This is a plan that's been in the building for many, many years. I think we know what Iran's overall objectives are. Strategically, number one, they want hegemony in the Middle East. Number two, they want hegemony within Islam. And the Ring of Fire strategy is a step in that direction. Iran has had enormous success ever since the revolution of 1979 in creating and growing terrorist groups. Let's not forget that the terrorist who bombed the American embassy in the summer of 1983 in Beirut, who bombed the Marine barracks later that fall, were terrorists who later became components of Hezbollah, put together by the Iranians. Hezbollah is now their crown jewel. They have bestowed on it something, by public estimates, something in the range of 120 to 150,000 missiles, which are in arsenals that Hezbollah controls in Lebanon and probably in Syria. Iran has done this elsewhere with Hamas, with the Houthis in Yemen, with Shia militia groups in Iraq and Syria. Over decades now, they have helped shape these groups, trying to make the militia in Iraq, for example, into an Iraqi Hezbollah. They have taken advantage of splits within the Arab world. They have gotten Hamas, which started as a radical religious, into an arm of the Persian Shia state. The Houthi rebels in Yemen, another Sunni Arab group, are surrogates of Iran as well. And for all these groups, they have armed them, they have equipped them, they have trained them, they have financed them for decades. And they didn't do it to suit the convenience of the terrorist groups. They did it to suit their own convenience. Now, what exactly Iran's objectives are in the near term, beginning with what happened on October the 7th, I don't know. I can't discern it. I don't think it's going very well for them. If you ask them how Hamas is doing against the IDF. But remember, Iran views many of these terrorist elements as expendable. They can be used as weapons, and their defeat doesn't really hurt Iran. And for everything that's happened in the region since October the 7th, remember, nothing in Iran has been touched. Nothing. They have paid no price. And as long as the aggressor doesn't pay a price, it will continue aggression. Very, very straightforward. So let's look at the developments and ask, what is the proper American response? What is the proper response of the West as a whole? And I mean by that the global West, including Japan and other countries that are industrial democracies. Hamas did not wake up one fine morning on its own and say, let's attack Israel. I have urged this point since October the 7th. And talking to media people, they say, well, where's the direct order from Iran to Hamas? Can you show the direct order? Look, the Israeli intelligence services missed the attack in its entirety, and so did American intelligence services. Is it any wonder that we missed the communications that launched the attack to begin with? Of course not. And besides that, it's not a case of a direct order. In the NATO alliance, the world's most successful political military alliance in history, the United States doesn't say, okay, France, tomorrow you do this. And by the way, Germany, you do that. That's not the way it works in the alliance, of which we are the undisputed leader. That's not how you do alliance management. But don't have any misimpression about what Hamas thought it was doing. I think the Iranians miscalculated. I think they thought that the divisions within Israel, the criticism of the government might have snapped something, might have brought the government down, might have spread dissension within Israel, may have weakened Israel to the point that additional steps could have been taken, perhaps by Hezbollah. I don't think they estimated the reaction in Israel to that barbarity on October the 7th, which seems to me at least has unified Israel in ways that people couldn't really understand. But that didn't communicate itself to the larger West. And so what we have now in capitals in Europe and the United States is an effort to act like October 7th never happened, and to say, this is the opportunity to create the two-state solution. Meaning, effectively, the IDF is now fighting in Gaza in order to put the Palestinian Authority in charge. Wonder if anybody's told the IDF soldiers that's what they're there for. I don't think they think that's what they're there for. People have not understood that the idea that has existed for 75 years now, that all Palestinians are refugees hereditarily, hasn't worked. The world since 1945 went through enormous refugee flows in the aftermath of World War II. And many of you in this room have families that were part of those refugee flows. It is and has been international humanitarian doctrine since then that refugee status is something to get over as soon as possible. That the refugees should either be returned to their country of origin, or where that's not possible, resettled in a third country. Obviously, the refugees are not going to be resettled in Israel, and they don't want it. They should be resettled for their own humanitarian good. And this idea that refugee status is hereditary is a toxic idea that has led to Gaza becoming a high-rise refugee camp where there's no viable economy and never will be. But people are talking about rebuilding it as if nothing had happened on October the 7th. This is not the kind of thinking that's going to lead to peace and stability in the Middle East. It's going to lead to more conflict. And what has happened as the conflict has continued is that Iran, in other fronts, has turned up the pressure on the West to force Israel to accept, in effect, acknowledging that they have a right to self-defense, but only a limited right to self-defense. You don't want to allow Israel actually to beat Hamas. So the Houthi rebels in Yemen, who have used Iranian weapons before to attack civil airports in the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, oil infrastructure in Saudi in particular, are now attacking commercial shipping and our naval vessels in the Red Sea. They have effectively closed the Suez Canal to international traffic. Suez Canal carries 30% of the world's cargo traffic in order to put economic pressure on the West. The Houthis wouldn't have two rocks to rub together if the Iranians didn't give them drones and missiles. This is an effort to bring the West to put more pressure on Israel. And waiting on the sidelines with those 120,000, 150,000 rockets in the north is Hezbollah, the jewel in the crown of terrorist groups that Iran has created. To think that you can solve the problem in Gaza and bring peace to the region while Hezbollah is still fully armed and still fully determined to make life impossible in Israel is a pipe dream. And by the way, the Shia militia in Iraq and Syria that conducted over 170 attacks on American military and civilian personnel since October the 7th, including bombing our embassy compound twice, are totally under Iran's control, as we can see by the actions of Iran in dialing back their activities after finally there was an effective retaliation when 3 Americans were killed after one militia attack. Iran's strategy, as I said, is not clear, but in these 4 different areas, like rheostats on a light switch, it can turn the conflict up and it can turn the conflict down. I think unless you look at this in that strategic context, you're never going to have an effective. People in public life in our country and Europe talk about not wanting a wider war. We have been in a wider war since October the 7th. This is not a one-front war, it's a 4-front war. And unless we understand that and are resolved to carry through to victory the efforts now by the Israeli government, we're simply going to have a lot more lives lost in vain. That objective won't be reached. The government of Israel, the war cabinet, the coalition government says that its objective is the elimination of Hamas as a military and political force. People say, well, an idea. How does this end? You can't kill an idea. I don't know. In World War II, I think we destroyed the Nazi idea, and it was brutal. People say, but Israel's gone too far, that the death and destruction in Gaza are now unacceptable. The death in Gaza are unacceptable. Ask who's responsible for it. The barbarians who put their own civilians at risk in order to protect themselves. I don't think that the government of Israel can be for the barbarity opponent and said that its self-defense has to be limited because of that. That is a true terrorist veto over the security of the terrorists themselves. And this is something that Israel has to continue to for because nobody else is going to do it for them. They are under enormous pressure from the government of the United States today, enormous pressure to have a ceasefire. Why? Because if you get a 6-week ceasefire, the hope is it'll never start again. And if it never starts again, Hamas will be back. Just like a climbing weed, it's going to come back. So this is very much a time of testing, and it is of international geopolitics that sometimes when a conflict begins, only one way to end it. And that's when one side wins. It's no mistake, in my view, that Israel is in the same position today that Winston Churchill saw Great Britain in at the beginning of World War II, when he said to the House of Commons, without victory, there is no survival. That was true then, and it's true today. And that's what Israel's policy should be, and we should support it. Thank you very much.